Thank you. I call Matt Ducey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's important for me to speak in support of the Child Protection, Child Sex Offender Register Bill at its first reading, and just like to commend the Minister, the Honourable Anne Tolley, for all the work she does in the space of protecting children and vulnerable children. I wouldn't say necessarily it would be a pleasure to rise to speak to a bill around child sex offenders, but I think as a father of a young daughter, Mr Speaker, many people in this room, parents, grandparents, uncles and aunties, and people throughout the country, it's something that we'll join together in support of making this country safer. It's a bill that's focused on offenders who are over 18, who have committed crimes on children who are under 16. And child sexual abuse, Mr Speaker, is a crime, and this government is tough on crime. It's tough on the causes of crime. When we look at crime in New Zealand at the moment, we do have one of our lowest crime rates since the 70s. I think our better public services target around crime of around 20% has already been surpassed. But as this bill demonstrates, there is always more to do. And that's what this government is committed and this government is focused on doing. When you look at the work we're doing around children and vulnerable young children, when we look at the release of the State of Care report from the Children's Commissioner and the response of the Minister and the government in looking at a modernisation and overhaul of SIFs, as well as children's teams to work with some of the most vulnerable young children before they go into care, and even things like raising the age of free GP care up to the age of 13. Mr Speaker, this bill is about establishing and creating a register that will collect information, things like names and addresses of child sex offenders, and it's well as about building a risk-based multi-agency management framework. And I think if we look at that sentence and unpack that for a minute, Mr Speaker, around the risk base, obviously child sex offenders pose a risk to people in the community, and it's understanding that risk and thinking through how that might play out in a community. Multi-agency, it's about ensuring how all the agencies are working together and that they're joined up. That might be police, corrections, you could imagine Ministry of Social Development and Housing New Zealand, understanding how child sex offenders might have a new partner and living in a house under their oversight with a new partner and children. So when we look at the regulatory impact statement, Mr Speaker, it is interesting that when we benchmark ourselves internationally and look at the research and evidence, it is very much a growing field, one that is still developing evidence around the use of a risk register, as well as long-term monitoring of child sex offenders. But when we look at one piece of research from the UK in 2011, it was around the multi-agency public protection arrangements that were introduced by the British government in 2001 called MAPPA. And what they identified from their research was there was a reduction in reconviction rates amongst sex offenders between 2001 and 2014. And that's when they compared to a cohort of 1998 to 2000, albeit the MAPPA was introduced in 2001. So what they evidenced was through risk profiling as well as risk management of the offenders, they were able to understand how they could cause a reduction in reoffending. And let us be clear that any reduction in reoffending is beneficial. If you look at some of the regulatory impact statement and the departmental disclosure statement, there is some references around child sex offenders, those who are serving or future ones will have less privacy of personal information through this bill. Depending on the severity of the crime, of course, some people will go on the risk register for 8 years, some child sex offenders for 15 years, and some for their life. And by being placed on this register, there will be less privacy of their personal information. But I think tough, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we're putting children first, and that's what we need to do. And I think this bill puts children first. I take the previous speaker's comments around public disclosure and how that probably doesn't do the children any good itself. But I think collecting this information and having multi-agency response and monitoring is the right thing to look at recidivism and to look at reoffending, to ensure that we're managing some very high-risk criminals right, and putting young people in our community safely. So when we look at the 3 types of information sharing this bill's talking about for child sex offenders when they go on the register, it's about facilitating more personal information that police and corrections can collect and discuss within themselves. It's also about ensuring that additional personal information can be shared with government agencies, MSD and Housing New Zealand, but it's also allowing police and corrections, if they feel it is right, to disclose personal and private information to people outside of those government departments if they feel that a child is at risk of reoffending. If the child sex offender is at risk of reoffending. Mr. Speaker, this bill creates decision-making power for the courts, and that was clearly stated in the departmental disclosure statement. So it has about 4 categories. If a child sex offender is found guilty of a qualifying offence but is given a non-custodial sentence, a court make an order of a child sex offender who poses a risk to the lives or sexual safety of child or children, or other offenders that have received a custodial sentence, and they will automatically be put on this register. But there is also another category, Mr. Speaker, and the previous speaker alluded to this, with New Zealand nationals committing these offences overseas and then being deported at the end of their sentence. And I know for my electorate this occurred recently, and the fear and the concern in the community that there was no oversight of this person coming back from another country and reintegrating in a community in New Zealand. So I think this will allay some of that fear for the local community, that they will understand that police and corrections will have oversight of this child sex offender. So I commend this bill to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.